The thermometer outside read -18 degrees. Claire had never experienced cold this brutal in her 32 years of life. But what she didn't know yet was that the freezing temperature outside would be nothing compared to the chill that would run down her spine before dawn. She had inherited the 3-story Georgian house from her Aunt Margaret just 6 months ago. The house sat on 2 acres of land, surrounded by towering pine trees that now bent under the weight of heavy snow. The nearest neighbor was over half a mile away, and on a night like this, Claire felt completely cut off from the world. The power had been flickering all evening. Each time the lights dimmed, Claire's heart skipped a beat. She couldn't afford to lose heat tonight, not in this cold, not alone in this massive house. She was sitting in the living room, wrapped in 3 blankets, when she first heard it, a soft, scraping sound coming from somewhere above her head. Claire froze, listening intently. The sound came again, long, deliberate scratches against wood. Her first thought was ice, tree branches scraping against the roof. That had to be it. But as she listened more carefully, the pattern seemed too rhythmic, too intentional. Claire grabbed her phone and turned on the flashlight. The scraping had stopped, but now she could hear something else. Footsteps. Slow, heavy footsteps moving across the floor directly above the living room. Someone was in her house. Her blood turned to ice water. Claire's hands trembled as she dialed 911, but when she pressed call, nothing happened. No signal. The storm must have knocked out the cell towers. The footsteps stopped. Silence filled the house again, but it wasn't comforting. It was the kind of silence that screams danger. Claire knew she had 2 choices: hide and hope whoever was upstairs would leave, or investigate and find out what she was dealing with. She chose investigation. Claire crept toward the main staircase, each step of the old wooden floors announcing her presence with loud creaks. At the bottom of the stairs, she paused. The second floor was completely dark. "Hello," she called out, her voice barely above a whisper. "Is someone there?" No response. She climbed the stairs one by one, the flashlight beam dancing nervously ahead of her. When she reached the second-floor landing, she could see that all 4 bedroom doors were closed, just as she had left them. But the scraping sound started again. This time it was coming from the 3rd floor, the attic level that she rarely visited. Her breathing became shallow. Whoever was in her house had moved upstairs while she was climbing. They knew she was coming. The attic staircase was narrower and steeper. As Claire climbed, the temperature seemed to drop even further. Her breath formed visible clouds in the beam of her flashlight. At the top of the stairs, she found herself in a long, narrow hallway with slanted ceilings. 3 rooms branched off from this hallway, 2 storage rooms, and her aunt's old art studio. The scraping was coming from the art studio. Claire approached the door slowly. It was slightly ajar, which was wrong. She always kept that door locked. She had never even been inside that room. She pushed the door open and stepped inside. The art studio was larger than she had expected, with tall windows that faced the backyard. Easels and canvases were scattered throughout the room, covered in white sheets that looked ghostly in her flashlight beam. But what caught her attention was the far corner of the room. Someone had cleared away the sheets from several canvases, and they were all portraits. Portraits of Claire. Not photographs, hand-painted portraits showing her doing everyday activities, making coffee in the kitchen, reading in the living room, sleeping in her bedroom. Claire's heart pounded as she moved closer to examine the paintings. They were incredibly detailed and realistic. Someone had been watching her for months, studying her daily routines, painting her without her knowledge. That's when she noticed the signature in the bottom right corner of each painting. M. Chen, 2024. Margaret Chen. Her Aunt Margaret. But that was impossible. Aunt Margaret had died 8 months ago. These paintings showed Claire in this house, wearing clothes she had bought just weeks ago. A floorboard creaked behind her. Claire spun around, and there, in the doorway, stood an elderly Asian woman. She was wearing the same green cardigan that Aunt Margaret always wore, but her face was wrong. Too pale, too thin. Her eyes were completely black. "You've been a wonderful subject, Claire, but I think it's time for the final portrait." Claire screamed and ran toward the window, but the woman moved with impossible speed, blocking her path. Her flashlight beam revealed that the woman's feet weren't touching the floor. She was floating 6 inches above the ground. "Aunt Margaret?" Claire whispered. "Margaret is gone, but her house remembers. Her studio remembers. And now you'll help me remember too." Claire closed her eyes, and when she opened them, she was standing in her kitchen. Bright morning sunlight streamed through the windows. The temperature was a comfortable 72 degrees. Her phone had full signal bars. She immediately called the police. When they arrived an hour later, they found no evidence of an intruder, no footprints in the snow around the house, no signs of forced entry. But in the art studio, they found something that made Claire pack her bags that same afternoon. All of Margaret's paintings were blank canvases again, except for one. A detailed portrait of Claire painted in the exact position she had been standing when she saw the woman in the doorway. At the bottom, in fresh paint, was a message: "Thank you for the final portrait. M. Chen, 2024. Claire sold the house the following week. She never found out who bought it, but sometimes, on the coldest nights, she wonders if they've found the art studio yet.
Nathan thought he was prepared for anything when he moved into the 4-story brownstone in upstate New York. He had done his research. The house was built in 1897, had been renovated 3 times, and had housed over 40 different families throughout its history. What the real estate agent hadn't mentioned was that 23 of those families had moved out within 6 months. It was the second week of January, and the temperature had been below zero for 5 straight days. Nathan's heating bills were astronomical, but even with the furnace running constantly, certain parts of the house remained ice cold. Specifically, the 4th floor. Nathan had turned the 4th floor into his home office. It had the best natural light during the day, and he enjoyed the feeling of working at the top of his house. But as winter deepened, the 4th floor became uninhabitable. It wasn't just cold, it was Arctic. Even with space heaters running, Nathan's breath would fog up whenever he climbed to the 4th floor. Ice would form on the inside of the windows. His contractor couldn't explain it. The insulation was perfect. The heating ducts were clear. There was no reason for that floor to be 30 degrees colder than the rest of the house. That's when Nathan started hearing the sounds. It began with footsteps in the middle of the night. Heavy boots walking back and forth across the 4th floor. Always between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. Always the same pattern. 20 steps from the east wall to the west wall. A pause, then 20 steps back. Nathan would grab a baseball bat and investigate, but every time he reached the 4th floor, the footsteps would stop. The room would be empty and frigid. After a week of sleepless nights, Nathan decided to set up a camera. He positioned it at the top of the stairs, pointing down the main corridor of the 4th floor. The camera had night vision and motion detection. The next morning, Nathan eagerly checked the footage. What he saw made him question his sanity. At 2:17 a.m., the motion sensor activated, but there was no one visible in the corridor. However, Nathan could clearly see footprints appearing in the frost that had formed on the hardwood floors. Boot prints exactly the size and pattern he had been hearing every night. The invisible footsteps walked the same pattern, 20 steps east, pause, 20 steps west. They continued for exactly 2 hours, then stopped. Nathan watched the footage 3 times, but there was no explanation for what he was seeing. Footprints appearing from nothing. No heat signature, no visible presence, just the evidence that something was walking his floors every night. He called his friend Derek, who worked in forensics for the police department. Derek came over that evening with specialized equipment. "I've seen some weird stuff in my job," Derek said as he set up motion sensors and thermal cameras throughout the 4th floor. "But this is a new one." They waited in Nathan's living room, monitoring the equipment on Derek's laptop. At exactly 2:17 a.m., every sensor on the 4th floor activated simultaneously. "That's impossible," Derek whispered, staring at his screen. "The motion detectors are showing movement, but the thermal cameras show nothing, no heat signature at all." They climbed to the 4th floor together. The temperature was so cold they could see their breath immediately. But more disturbing was what they found on the floor. Fresh boot prints in the frost. But not just the ones Nathan had been seeing. There were dozens of them, different sizes, different patterns, as if a crowd of invisible people had been walking through the house. Derek knelt down and examined the prints with his flashlight. "Nathan," he said quietly, "some of these prints are going up the walls." Nathan looked where Derek was pointing. Boot prints traveled from the floor, up the wall, across the ceiling, and back down the opposite wall in a perfect loop. "That's not possible," Nathan said. "Nothing can walk on ceilings." Derek stood up slowly. "Unless they're not bound by gravity anymore." That's when they heard it. Not footsteps this time. Voices. Dozens of voices, all whispering at once. The words were unclear, but the tone was unmistakable. They sounded angry, demanding. The whispers grew louder and seemed to be coming from inside the walls themselves. Nathan and Derek backed toward the staircase, but the voices followed them. "Leave," Derek said urgently. "We need to leave right now." They ran down the stairs and out of the house. In Nathan's car, Derek turned to him with a grave expression. "I did some research on your house while I was setting up the equipment," Derek said. "In 1923, there was a fire on the 4th floor. 11 people died. They were trapped up there when the staircase collapsed." Nathan felt his blood run cold. "Why didn't anyone tell me this?" "Because it was ruled an accident, but I found some old police reports that were never made public. The fire started in multiple places at once. Someone had blocked all the exits from the 4th floor. It wasn't an accident. It was murder." Nathan never spent another night in that house. He hired a property management company to handle finding tenants, but no one ever stayed longer than a few weeks. The 4th floor remains empty to this day. Local contractors refuse to work up there. They say the cold is unbearable even in summer. But sometimes, on the coldest nights, neighbors report seeing lights moving behind the 4th floor windows. And if you listen carefully from the street, you can still hear the footsteps. 20 steps east. Pause. 20 steps west. They're still walking, still searching for the way out they never found in 1923.
The Riverside mansion had been empty for 3 years when Marcus finally gathered the courage to spend a night inside. As the property caretaker, he was supposed to check on the house weekly, but he had always done his inspections during daylight hours. Tonight was different. Tonight, the temperature was going to drop to -25 degrees, and Marcus had received reports that squatters might be using the mansion for shelter. The mansion was enormous, 5 stories, 37 rooms, and over 12,000 square feet of living space. The owners lived in Dubai now and only visited twice a year. They paid Marcus well to maintain the property, but they had one specific rule. No one was allowed to stay overnight in the house. Marcus had never asked why. He arrived at the mansion at 8 p.m., just as the sun was setting. The temperature was already dropping rapidly, and the wind was beginning to howl through the bare trees that surrounded the property. Snow was falling heavily, and Marcus knew that within a few hours, the roads would be impassable. The mansion's front door was an impressive 12 feet tall, made of solid oak with intricate iron hardware. Marcus used his key and stepped inside, immediately feeling the temperature difference. The mansion was cold, but not as brutal as the outside air. His plan was simple. Check each floor systematically, make sure no one was hiding inside, then spend the night in the main living room where he could monitor all the entrances. He started with the ground floor. The mansion was furnished with expensive antiques and artwork, all covered in white sheets to protect them from dust. Marcus walked through the formal dining room, the library, the conservatory, and the kitchen. Everything was exactly as it should be. The second floor contained 6 bedrooms and 4 bathrooms. Marcus checked each room carefully, looking behind curtains and inside large wardrobes. Still nothing. The third floor had been converted into a recreational area with a game room, a small theater, and a gymnasium. As Marcus walked through these rooms, he began to notice something strange. Despite the cold weather, certain areas of the house felt warm. Not just comfortable, but actually warm. Specifically, wherever he found warmth, there were wet footprints on the floor. Small puddles of melted snow formed perfect footprint patterns leading from room to room. But the footprints didn't match Marcus's boots. They were smaller, and they seemed to follow a different path through the house than the one he was taking. Marcus stopped walking and stood perfectly still, listening. The mansion was silent except for the wind outside and the occasional creak of old wood settling. That's when he realized the footprints were fresh, not just damp, but actually wet, with small pools of water still forming around each print. Someone else was in the house. Someone who had been walking through these rooms just minutes before Marcus arrived. Marcus pulled out his phone to call the police, but the signal was dead. The cell towers had knocked out. He considered leaving immediately, but his car was probably already snowed in, and if there really were squatters in the house, he couldn't leave them to freeze to death. "Hello?" Marcus called out. "If someone's here, please answer me. I'm not going to hurt you, but I need to know where you are." His voice echoed through the empty mansion, but there was no response. Marcus continued to the 4th floor, following the trail of wet footprints. This floor contained the master bedroom suite and 2 guest rooms. The footprints led directly to the master bedroom. The bedroom door was closed. Marcus put his ear against it and listened. He could hear something inside, a soft sound, like someone breathing heavily. "I'm coming in. Please don't be frightened." He opened the door slowly. The master bedroom was enormous, with a king-sized 4-poster bed dominating the center of the room. The wet footprints led directly to the bed, and then they stopped. But there was no one visible in the room. Marcus checked the walk-in closet, the attached bathroom, and even under the bed. The room was empty, but it was noticeably warmer than the rest of the house, and the breathing sounds continued. That's when Marcus noticed something that made his skin crawl. The covers on the bed were disturbed. The heavy comforter was pushed aside, and there was a clear indentation in the mattress, the shape of a human body. As Marcus watched, the indentation grew deeper, as if someone was settling more comfortably into the bed. The breathing sounds became more regular, like someone falling asleep. Marcus backed away from the bed slowly. "Who are you?" he whispered. "What do you want?" The breathing stopped immediately. The room became completely silent, but the indentation in the mattress remained. Marcus could see the outline of a person lying on their side, knees drawn up slightly, head resting on the pillow. Then the covers began to move. The comforter slowly pulled itself up, covering the invisible form in the bed. Marcus watched in terror as the blanket settled into the exact shape of someone sleeping peacefully. "This isn't real. This can't be real." But as he spoke, the form in the bed shifted. The head turned toward him, and Marcus could see the indentation in the pillow change, as if someone was looking directly at him. A voice spoke from the bed, soft, female, and infinitely sad. "I'm so cold. I've been cold for so long." Marcus ran. He sprinted down 4 flights of stairs and burst through the front door into the freezing night. The snow was falling so heavily he could barely see his car, but he didn't care. He waded through knee-deep snow and managed to start the engine. As he drove away, Marcus looked back at the mansion. Every window on every floor was now glowing with warm, golden light. And in the master bedroom window on the 4th floor, he could see a silhouette, a woman in a long nightgown standing at the window and watching him leave. Marcus never returned to the mansion. He quit his job the next day and moved to Arizona. 6 months later, he received a phone call from the mansion's owners. They wanted to know why he had left all the lights on during his last visit. The electrical bill for that night was over $800. Marcus told them that he hadn't turned on any lights. The power had been shut off to the mansion for over 2 years. The owners sold the mansion the following month. The new buyers lasted 3 weeks before putting it back on the market. They claimed the house was haunted by a woman who had frozen to death in the master bedroom during the winter of 1847. She's still there, still trying to get warm, still waiting for someone to stay with her through the long, cold nights. And on the coldest nights of winter, when the temperature drops below -20 degrees, the mansion's lights still turn on by themselves. Every window glows warmly, as if someone inside is desperately trying to fight off the cold that claimed her life over a century ago.